So what I want to do, is everyone a Hadley resident?
No,
No, where do you live, sir?
I live in Leverett and Washington DC area.
DC, cool. So this is actually, I put together this deck. Actually, Jack, this is, might seem familiar to this. This is my bookshelf in my office, and that's a bronze statue from 9/11. I was talking with Jackie, I was down at 9/11. This helmet, I was a firefighter paramedic for about 32 years. This helmet was actually down at 9/11 for 5 days with me. This is my helmet from Northampton. Here's my book I wrote last year on the history of flooding in the Connecticut River Valley. So what I wanted to do was just give you a quick overview of what's in your backyard. I'm assuming everyone else is in Hadley now. So being in emergency management and public safety for 32 years and having spent 25 here in Western Massachusetts, 12 in Amherst, 13 in Northampton, really focused on these big issues, everything from terrorism to fires, you name it. If it's gone on here, I've likely dealt with it. What you have right over there, less than a mile away, is probably the #1 hazard in the state of Massachusetts with that dike that was built in 1928 and has largely gone unmaintained. So let's talk about the history of flooding in this area. So I liked how the keynote speakers sort of started, glacially and worked our way down. And I kept waiting, keep going, keep going, keep going. This is the Oxbow. So you'll see this sort of, obviously, the Connecticut River runs between Northampton and Amherst, so Northampton and Hadley, but it's hard to stay on one side of the river. Very interesting. We're not going to have time to get too far into it, but the way flood mitigation and management is handled in Northampton is very different from an infrastructure perspective than here in Hadley. Here in Hadley, it's essentially passive. You have this dike system and some culverts. In Northampton, there are big flood walls and pumps. Very different. And they were built around the same time. This is 1936. You might recognize that. That's what would be Route 5, and that's the bridge there. And this is going over the Oxbow now. So whenever I look at these issues, my premise is that what happened then can happen again, and likely will. I mean, long story short, the punchline here is the river always wins. The river is going to do what the river does. So I'm not a geomorphologist. I like listening to other geomorphologists, though, and the keynote was very helpful. So I believe Julie mentioned earlier during the keynote, we would have been 1 mile under ice 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, give or take. The glacier melted and left behind, this is about Rocky Hill, Connecticut. There was a landmass that was acting as a dam. The landmass gave way, and somewhere around 6,000 years ago, the Connecticut River was formed. So this is Lake Hitchcock and Rocky Hill. Now we are in the middle of the Connecticut River. This is a map from 1831. We are here. You are here. All right? So the Connecticut River more or less goes straight north from the southern, today's southern Canadian border down to Old Saybrook on the Long Island Sound. More or less straight. If you follow 91, that's pretty much the path of the river, give or take. This is where we are now, and you can see there are at least 2 hairpin curves in the river at this point. Right? This one here exists, and the Coolidge Bridge is right about here today. There's another bridge passing over in 1831, excuse me. This here is what is the modern Oxbow, right? But you'll notice that the river passes around it, all right? So this is land, this is a neck. Around this time, there has been a lot of legislation. People were, the industry, business and industry was promoting cutting a canal through this area. This was 1795. You had the canals being built around South Hadley and Windsor Locks and even up into Turners at this point. So this was post-War of 1812. This area was hopping. A lot of business and industry. This stretch of land, which is less than a mile or so, give or take a mile, maybe a little bit more, could take days to travel, using loaded barges, depending on a bunch of conditions. So there were people, largely in Northampton, who wanted to cut this off in order to make the pass-through quicker, more efficient. This you might have seen before. This is Thomas Cole, the view of the Oxbow from the Mount Holyoke, Northampton, after a thunderstorm, I believe.
Mount Holyoke in Hadley at the Summit House.
There she goes. Thank you. So this is a famous painting, right, Thomas Cole, and this is pre-Oxbow. And I'm not an art historian, but it sounds like someone knows. But there's a lot going on in this painting, right? And what I've learned as I study this stuff is that this painting is not only beautiful, but it demonstrates the progress, right? So this would have been, these two sides of the river would have looked similar at one point.
But that's been cleared.
This has been cleared, right? There's agriculture. And you guys are all familiar with what this view is, right? So we're looking essentially that way. At this point, though, if you were up there, this is on Skinner, right?
Yeah.
If you're looking this way at this time, and this was painted in 1836, even at that time, if you shifted your gaze, probably about 30, 45 degrees here, you would have seen the Northampton skyline with smokestacks and railroads and busy little town thriving away and like puffing large plumes of smoke into the air. People very busy. So this is what is, there's a lot more going on here. And someone might say this sort of thunderstorm in the background is future. So suddenly, that was painted in 1836. 1840, a spring freshet happens.
Oh my God.
10 feet of ice, that bridge over Northampton, or from Hadley into Northampton. Water builds up, as water does, and washes away that bridge under that ice. And over a period of about a day or so, the path of the river is changed forever. The Oxbow is created, and we never go back. This is 1840. Wow. So again, Thomas Cole painted that in 1836, 1840, boom, things have changed forever. Here we go again. So this is from a 1947 USGS report. I love this image. It's like a panoramic image. It's hard to see, but most of you know the area at this point, so you can get a view. The Manhan Meadows and the Northampton Meadows. Nice skyline. Here's the Oxbow here. This is quite telling, right? So here's the Oxbow, and we are here off the map, but you're familiar with the north hairpin curve up there. So again, this was created in the aftermath there. This is up in Northfield, I believe. Yeah, tremendous. This is from the 1936 flood in Northfield. You can read about it in the book. But about 400 head of cattle were killed. I don't know how to say that because I grew up in Brooklyn. But a lot of cows were killed right here during 1936.
Oh my God.
Long history of flooding in this area. So right before 1900, floods were documented in diaries and weather diaries and through reporters. So they were historic floods. Right after 1900, 1905, I think, was one of the first USGS flood gauges in the area. So we started to be able to get some metrics, actually start to track these floods. Everything up until around 1900 was anecdotal, it was historical. The water was this high, and you walk around and you see flood marks on trees and buildings and that kind of thing. And people tell stories about their grandfather. When I was sitting next to Denise on the panel, I leaned over and I said, I was serious. I want to come over and go through your grandparents' photos because I'm sure that they have, photos of when the water was this high. If you haven't been down Route 47, you probably all have seen that flood marker. It's impressive, right? Put yourself there and think about what it was like on March of 1936. So dozens of notable floods, but really some of the most historic, November of 1927, a weather pattern came up the Connecticut River and parked itself in northern Vermont. Tremendous damage in northern Vermont on the Mad River. But almost like Irene in 2011, the water comes down and does damage up and down the Connecticut River Valley. Hadley here was impacted. Keep in mind, again, this is November, it's cold. This is in the roaring 20s, so this is between the world wars. Things are actually pretty good at that time. Electricity is sparse in this area. The big cities have electricity. They're also using gas for lights and heat. but it's sporadic. Most of the area, most of the houses in this area would probably not have electricity or gas. Northampton, yes. Amherst, probably. Certain areas, but probably not here. So 1927, horrific flooding. And we have, oops, did I miss one? No. So 1936, the next flood. This is here. I believe the Hadley Fire Station, the old Hadley Fire Station is right there, right? On West Street, sorry, we're on Middle Street. I get lost. So that's the old Hadley Fire Station on West Street. And in 1936, a different type of freshet comes in. So in 27, it was a more of a, almost like probably a hurricane system, like Irene, comes up late in the fall and creates that damage. In 36, though, it's a spring freshet, just like back in 1840. Happens all the time. The water rises, particularly cold winter, went over the dikes. The dike was there, was built in 1928, and the aftermath of 27 went right over the dike and flooded straight downtown. Obviously, lots of damage in 36. I mean, this event was a northeastern event, up as far as Maine, out to Ohio, down to Virginia and DC. I mean, this was a major event. I just happened to look at, this is my backyard, so that's why I focused here. Again, the river changes pattern again. A new channel is created right around Hockham, obviously, the Northampton Meadows. The river does what the river does, right? It shifts and moves. This is 36 in March. This is actually early on. And then another flooding event that you may have been maybe familiar with was 1938. This is a hurricane, again, not a spring freshet, but a hurricane came up into Long Island Sound, straight up the Connecticut River. Most of the damage here was done as a result of wind, but there was a massive amount of flooding as well. So you can see the damage here. This is probably around one of the meadows. But a much different scenario. This, 36 and 38, was happening at a much different time in our history, right? This was in the middle of the Great Depression. So the industry had essentially ground to a halt. People really were left homeless. They were left without jobs. They really did not know where their next meal was coming from or what they were going to do. The recovery from these events was long and hard. The period between 1936 and 1938 in this particular area, there was a fair amount of building. This was in the middle of the New Deal. So a lot of these systems that you'll see put into place around here and down into West Springfield, Chicopee, down into Hartford, were all New Deal programs. Put in place as a result of all that funding. This is from the 1947 USGS report, and what I want you to focus on is, this is the Connecticut River, and comparing 1936 to 1938, and this is essentially basic, baseline water. This is 1913. Keep in mind, again, these are new numbers for this time. But look at this. Look at these differences, and arguably the level changes because the river gets wide and then narrows down around Mount Tom. So that impacts some of the differences here. The water is very different. I was talking to Mr. Wright. He spends some time rowing on the river, and depending on where you are on the river and what time of year and how much rain, it can be a completely different game if you're out there.
Can you read the coordinates on the map, on the chart, because I can't.
Oh, sure. So this is just the distance from the bottom of the river from Old Saybrook up to Canada. So, but this area here essentially represents the two hairpin curves. So this is down to, this is Turner's, I'm sorry, I got it backwards. This is Turner's Falls, and this is the Holyoke Narrows. So you can just see the difference in the water level in 1936 and 1938 compared to average. So you can see that there's a much higher level. The level in feet, it's all relative. This is a normal day, and these are storm days. That's what we're trying to emphasize here. These are all right here. This is the Meadows in 1936, and the same spot in 1939. So this is an average day, and this is inundated with flood water. This is some tobacco barn in Hadley, probably gone at this point, but just to give you a sense of the erosion. And then this is Hadley looking down what Russell Street, Route 9, from the air. in 36. 36, there was taking aerial images was relatively a new phenomenon. So I have a drone in my bag at all times. It's probably about this big and costs $400. New technology had to be developed in order to take these panoramic images from the air. Cutting edge technology then. So that's a quick snapshot. There were other floods. 55 didn't impact this area quite as much, but we'll fast forward to 2011 and Hurricane Irene. Again, same system as in 27. The system parks itself in northern Vermont and inundates the Connecticut River Valley down below. This is an image from the Gazette, and this is infrastructure that was put in place in post-1936 flood and never utilized for 50 years until we needed to stand up this temporary flood mitigation structure, right? So this was, I was actually working this during these days in 2011 in Northampton by that point, and putting these systems up took about 24 hours. And this is this would be the flood wall at Smith College. So if you were looking down, the Smith College is to my right, and then the plant is down to this is downstream, the Mill River running through here. So this system was built and but not activated until 2011. I mentioned that the dike right up here was built in 1928 in the aftermath of 1927 flood. As I was getting ready to talk with you guys about this particular presentation, I reached out to Chief Spankenable at the fire department, the fire chief here in town, because I was seeing mixed results. I was saying, what's going on here? On one report in 2018, the flood, there was a recommendation for a new dike, okay? And then again in 2011, or 2021, excuse me, the language seems softer to me. They're pondering a new dike system. What's, this is kind of, this doesn't seem, I'm here to tell you, hair on fire, people. Hair on fire, all right? Look at this date, in 2009. Were all of you residents in 2009? Okay. In 2009, I'll put you back in time. The Home Depot was being built at that point.
Yeah.
The river was coming up, and there were concerns, grave concerns, on the peninsula. Not further out, not further inland where we are now, but further out to the point, and I'm going to show you where. There was a
Did we have Pioneer Valley Planning Commission yet then?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have said so.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were aware, but we were just talking about it.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. So we're here, you'll get oriented. There's the river. Coolidge Bridge is going to come up here.
What a cool photograph.
There's the bridge. This is modern day peninsula, and the river's going to go up north now. We're here. All right. So I thought that the real hazard was here. I always did. I always thought this was the hazard. Turns out this is the hazard.
Sure.
So you're here, right? We're here. I always thought that the dike goes along here, riprap, and sort of fizzles out here. I've never visualized it down into this part. I always thought what kept me up at night, and what would keep me up at night, is that the river was just going to overtop here and cut this corner off.
Point to where we are again?
We're here. There's Route 9, Russell Street, West Street in the middle. So we are here.
Okay.
So I always thought that that was our big hazard. That's where this thing was going to go sideways, right? The river, we're talking about droughts and then being inundated with several inches of flood. I always picture in my mind the river's going to overtop the 1928 dike and come straight down. Well, I was wrong. This is where the hazard is, and it's because that dike has not been maintained. And in 2009, it was deemed, it was going to fail. There was a spoil pile there. They had staged heavy equipment there. They were ready to go. They were watching it as this river came up. There were some repairs that had been made, and it's been patched, but it failed. The patches have failed, and they've sort of backfilled them in now. But this is where this is going to happen. I think we have a fluvial geomorphologist in the room now who's going, when this fails, I won't put you on the spot, but when this fails,
I totally agree with you. I always thought that was like a Band-Aid sitting there.
but my concern, and I'm not obligating you, put me on the spot, but find an engineer who's gonna say, when this thing fails, it's just gonna create another Ellswell Island north. There's nothing to say that this thing is not gonna just sort of whittle its way down, and all of a sudden we're in Home Depot parking lot.
Wherever the ground is lowest.
Yeah.
The other thing is in the late eighties, there was a terrible flood in the whole Aquafina area.
84, I believe, or 89, one of the, 89.
Yeah, and it got flooded and the people on West Street had to evacuate just in case.
89.
But Aquafina looked like a moonscape.
Yeah.
Afterwards.
So my ask of you, or my warning to you, is that this is out there now. That there are lots of solutions to deal with this, and you know, I said in our warm-up session earlier that I'm the glass half empty guy. It's my job to look at these situations and point a finger. I'm all about the greenhouse gas emissions and all these other efforts.
We gotta deal with this. Yeah.
This is here.
Flood
And
is an issue.
And just to wrap it up, I'm not suggesting that the solutions here are to build more concrete flood walls and to dump more riprap and to address these issues in the way that we've done in the past. There are modern solutions to this. There are looking at building resiliency by planting and by redirecting water and natural-based solutions. When I talk to my people and on the emergency management and the disaster response side, I introduce them to these concepts because I'm the only one saying, hey, maybe instead of pouring riprap and building concrete walls with rebar, which makes my heart warm, right? That's not the way that this is gonna actually be managed. We need to think, we need to talk with people who look at these problems and come up with some innovative solutions that look forward. So when we're dealing with long periods of drought and then spikes of precipitation, the water has somewhere to go instead of just being,
Where it stays put instead of flowing.
or channeled down, like as we saw with Irene in the Chickley River, right? I mean, that was a very expensive mistake that they had to go in and undo. So introducing my folks to these nature-based solutions is what I do when I'm not talking with folks like you. I deal with a lot of professionals, emergency managers, and say, hey, the way we're going to deal with this, the way we're going to be dealing with this holistically and really resolve the problem is sometimes to replant riparian boundaries and create softer solutions that are going to really end up solving the problems, not just making them our neighbor's problem.
Josh, can I just quickly mention that we're about to start the children's theater, so.
Perfect. I don't want to step on the children's theater's toes. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, what I'm
Thank you very
worried
much.
about, where you said that the dike peters out, that's where the old landfill is.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Oh,
all
nasty.
kinds of horrible pollution will happen if the water.
I got all day if you want to talk about how bad it gets, but yeah. But yes, yeah, it's,
I couldn't believe they put it there.
these are cascading problems.
Oh, wow.
One thing leads to another, it gets worse and worse and worse. Yes.
Yeah, but we gotta have all this.
So my ask to you is when these things come up locally, you understand them and support these very expensive problems.